We are just 2 days away from the 15th anniversary of 9/11, and researchers have found that first responders experienced PTSD just like our military veterans.
Are there going to be other correlations? Joining us on the KOGO News Live Line, PTSD specialist Shannon Walker. And Shannon, what exactly did this study find?
Well, the study is finding that, this many years later, there is the residual effect of cognitive impairment. And, the trauma that our first responders are facing are so much like almost exactly like what our combat veterans are facing in not only environmental catastrophe, but dealing on, in their daily life and in their job and their experience dealing with the loss of life and bodies and rubble and having to face that. And the study not only reminds us of what our first responders could have faced, or did face that day, and the invisible wounds that come along with that affect them. I mean, we have cause and effect issues here that are so similar with our combat veterans as well as our first responders.
This Sunday is going to be the 15-year anniversary of this tragic event. These first responders, are they still suffering today?
Well, I would imagine they would. I'm not a doctor, but what I deal with on a daily basis is our combat veterans who continually, it doesn't matter which conflict they experienced, which war they experienced, it is a part of who they are now, and they have been forever changed. And, we as a public, what we do here at Northwest Battle Buddies in providing service dogs to these men and women who have served, they're different. They're changed. Not only are they physically changed, like what that study shows, but they're emotionally changed. And we as free Americans, whether we're living on American soil and we owe our freedom to our first responders and our safety here, as well as we owe our freedom and our safety to our veterans who serve in other countries. I mean, it's, my dad always taught me, it's cause and effect. When you have a trauma, they call it invisible wounds of war, invisible wounds of what our first responders faced on that day. The best thing we can do that this study helps show is that not only is there a metabolical change, but the fact is that we can never forget what they faced that day. We can never forget the loss of life. We can never forget the attack on our country. We can never forget as free Americans the price paid for our security, whether it's foreign or here.
It's interesting, and not in a good way. I should mention that the researchers extrapolated out to estimate that overall between 3,740 to 5,300 responders may actually have cognitive impairment because of what happened, and 240 to 810 may have dementia. So does this change brain chemistry? How does this work?
Well, I would imagine that it would. I read the study also, and what I deal with on a daily experience with men and women who have TBI from such trauma, when cognitive impairment, they have a loss of memory. They have a loss of being able to function and even make day-to-day decisions at times based on their environment, their stress level. It can very much affect just, like I said, their day-to-day life. And that's one of the reasons, because even also in that study, it talks about how it relates to PTSD. And one of the things about PTSD is the one primary symptom of that I see happen throughout all of the people that I work with is isolation. When you have that kind of impairment, when you are struggling with just functioning, you want to isolate yourself. And that's one of the greatest symptoms of such a trauma.
Is it better for the first responders and for people suffering from PTSD? You said isolation. Is it better for them to try to get them to talk about what happened? Does that help?
Absolutely, it does. In fact, Northwest Battle Buddies is the organization that I founded. And when we provide service dogs, one of the main things that we teach people and help them overcome is how to talk about not necessarily talk about what they experienced, but how to reintegrate back into the public, how to answer questions in a positive way to be on, because a lot of the people that we work with, I mean, they only shop at 3 a.m. in the morning because they don't want to see anybody. And when you have a service dog, as an example, because that's what we provide, you are forced to deal with the public. You are forced to learn how to interact and overcome, those fears. And that's where healing begins, is is when people move outside of their comfort zone. They isolate themselves so they don't have to deal with it. And different therapies are, like what we provide and other therapies to help these men and women reintegrate into life so they can have freedom and independence.
PTSD specialist Shannon Walker with us on the Kogo News Live Line. Thank you so much for joining us. A very scary study on first responders on 9/11 says that there is a link between PTSD and the development of cognitive impairment, of Alzheimer's and dementia.